What do we think about when we think about graveyards? Is it ghost stories and goths? Is it the sterile and somewhat unsettling funeral industry? Is it grief? Or is it, at least in my case, a sort of giddy fascination with these complex and interesting spaces that say so much about how communities and individuals handle the greatest mystery of human life, which is death?
Of course you would just go to a graveyard and try to figure out what's what and all the stories of the people in there. Of course you would.
That's Jalika. She's my coworker who's one of those people who always has correct opinions. And I'm really glad she stopped by my office while I was writing this episode, because when it comes to graveyards, she has a very different perspective than me.
Most people would avoid them, like me. I'm not going into a cemetery, although I have been to the Hollywood Cemetery. But typically when I go past a cemetery, I'm like whistling, so I'm not like haunted by anybody who's there. But you were like, yeah, let's go in there. Let's say hey to everybody.
And it kind of makes me sad.
And that's my other coworker, Val. Val is a historian, and I was surprised that she too, being a historian, there's a sense of misgivings. Okay, so both you and Jalika maybe are of this is kind of a sad place.
Yeah, because no one's alive and talking.
Hollywood forever is one of my favorite places on the planet.
And that's Karina Wilson. She's a writer and historian who's been on this podcast before. I've
been on dates here. I've watched movies here. I've seen bands play. I've been to movie premieres. I've even been to a funeral here. I think it's the most delicious, perfect slice of Hollywood and history, and there are feral cats. I mean, it couldn't...
And peacocks.
And peacocks. So if you wanted to put all my favorite things in a blender, this is what would come out.
What does it mean to be a person who enjoys graveyards? Why do people who enjoy graveyards so much? This is Haunted Hollywood Hour, the podcast where we bring you new spooky stories from Hollywood history every week. I'm Carly Heath. Today we're talking about the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, what it tells us about Hollywood, humans, legacies, and grief.
I mean, the fact that we have a cemetery that's known to have Hollywood people who were sort of like, I don't want to say worship, but highly regarded in their life, and then they have like this special place where they get to like be under the ground, just kind of gives this idea of like, even in death, they're important. And it's a little weird that we give so much of that attention to not living people, but people who we just know literally through a lens.
In my small market town in England, the only place where teenagers could really hang out without adults telling us to go home was the local cemetery. So there was a whole tradition of hanging out in the cemetery on the Friday and Saturday night, drinking cider, or even Thunderbird if we were feeling particularly dangerous. And so I've always associated cemeteries with a good time.
There's probably 50% of people go, cemeteries really bother me. I don't like them. Mm-hmm. Do you ever hear that from people?
No, because those people are not my friends.
We're at the Judy Garland Pavilion. It's this huge building, and it's like huge, and it's like a mausoleum. I'm gonna whisper because we're entering. You walk in, and there's chairs, and there is Judy Garland's tomb. I guess it's sort of in a reddish marble color, and then it goes up, and there's a skylight at the top, and there's a camera up there, so making sure we're respectful. There is a guest book that you can sign. Someone put a photo of Judy there, and some rubies.
And fresh flowers. One of the things I love about the cemetery is every time you come, the graves are different because people come from all over the world to leave offerings. In effect, they're shrines. And the Judy Garland one is obviously incredibly popular.
But there's other people who are buried here in the Judy Garland Pavilion as well.
This is the columbarium. For those who are cremated, you don't need to buy yourself such a large space. You can get one of these. How would you describe them? These kind of
It's like an enclosed glass shelf with a urn in there, and then there's also your various mementos. And this is very different than the forest lawn cemeteries, which are very stark. This is like little bookshelves of people's collectibles. We're looking at the columbarium of this guy named John Cassisi, who was a dancer, and he's got a bobblehead doll of himself in there, and a whole like a little biography of himself, and there's a disco ball, and there's his urn that has dolphins on it. It's got his Artists and Music Awards trophy in there, and seashells.
It's a little kind of time capsule, I guess, of somebody's life and the things that were important to them. So this is a lovely way that you can remember somebody. Like complete strangers like ourselves can walk in and go, oh my goodness, John Cassisi, this is who he was. What a cool guy. And it's here, and the kind of people that will spend time in the Judy Garland Pavilion will appreciate. I mean, we've got
early in the process of producing this episode, I had this idea that we'd curate a list of the top 5 best graves in Hollywood forever. What I find, though, is there's stuff that may not make it on that list, but it's worth talking about because some of the most interesting memorials aren't for famous people at all.
Who is it? This is Raphael Marquis de Marchesne Huyck.
Well, so him and his wife, possibly,
yes,
or partner, Louise Islasis Richardson. And they have glass bird little carvings in here out of crystal. The things that people choose to put inside there, clearly some Judy Garland fans in here because someone has a picture of Judy Garland in their little space.
I think from a purely commercial point of view, to have Judy Garland as the centerpiece, people will then pay a premium to be buried nearby. I mean, there's all the stories about who bought the tomb next to Marilyn Monroe, for instance. We're going to go take a little sidebar to the Frank Garden.
Okay, let's do that.
So we're now in the southwest corner of the cemetery, beside the Beth Olam Gate, which is where originally people who wanted to be buried in the Jewish part of the cemetery used that as an entrance. It's locked these days, and everybody uses the same entrance because this cemetery is no longer segregated as it once was throughout a lot of the 20th century. But this area here it explores the concept of a cenotaph, which is a monument to mark somebody's life, but they're not actually buried underneath it. So there are a lot of cenotaphs in Hollywood forever, and it's testament to the current owners that they've tried to acknowledge the culture of a lot of the people who are buried here. And of course, with one of the largest Jewish sections in Los Angeles, this is a memorial garden for the victims of the Holocaust, because a lot of people buried in the section behind us would have perhaps been in camps themselves, or definitely had relatives who perished. So this is a lovely area. This fountain represents the rebirth of the Jewish people out of the ashes of the Holocaust. 6 channels of water representing the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the World War II era converge into a tree stump. The broken stump represents the lives that were cut off in their prime. The stump gives forth a flame, or a watery flame, signifying the rebirth of the Jewish people, and acts as an eternal memorial for all those who perished. And there's a verse in Hebrew, and thankfully a translation because I don't read Hebrew. As an elm and an oak, which when losing their fruit and leaves still have their vitality in them, so too will their stump again bring forth its holy seed. Isaiah 6:13.
There is a plaque for Anne Frank here. It says June 12th, 1929 to March 1945.
Yeah, there's a sort of embossed relief image of Anne Frank. And again, another quote, "This is a photo as I wish I still was. If so, I would still have a chance to come to Hollywood." Because that was one of her expressed.
Yeah, and now she's in Hollywood in spirit. And people have, as we head to the next location on our tour, I asked Karina if she's thought about her own final wishes.
I would like a mushroom suit.
A mushroom suit, what's that?
So it's a suit that you put on and it turns you into a mushroom. It would reunite me with our mycelium overlords.
I think that's fascinating. Is that like a real thing that you can do? So we're walking into the mausoleum, and there's a piano in the middle of the mausoleum, and it's a real piano. I don't know what that noise is. The piano doesn't play though. And I love mausoleums so much. You look down the hallway and you just see stacks and stacks of crypts.
So this is the Beth Olam Mausoleum, and it was built in the 1920s to help accommodate the Jewish burials, and it's one of the oldest Jewish cemeteries in Los Angeles because of segregation. And so, there was a huge Jewish community. They needed, you need somewhere to go when you die, and at that point they let Jewish burials happen. They weren't letting a lot of other kind of burials happen, but we'll go into that later. So let's go see Bugsy Siegel.
Okay, yay.
There's a cool breeze in here. I'm not quite sure where it's coming from.
I do always notice that. You always have little breezes in the mausoleum occasionally, or smells.
The breath of the dead.
I know, yeah. So we have, Benjamin Siegel, in loving memory from the family.
So this is the last resting place of Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, who was famous for founding Las Vegas and also being a fairly bloodthirsty gangster during his lifetime. So it's just one of many tombs in this whole mausoleum, but it stands out because it's actually covered with red lipstick smudges, and there's a series of casino chips, a gambling dice. And is that like a vape? Anyway, people have brought tributes to Bugsy because, so the superstition goes, if you bring a casino chip and put it on the grave and then go to Vegas, and I think kissing's probably in there as well, judging by the lipstick imprints. If you kiss the tomb, leave a casino chip, go to Vegas, you'll win.
Anyone listening to the podcast, if you've done that, let us know if you've won. A lot of the graves here seem to be from the 40s, so I'm not seeing a lot of new ones.
This is fairly well filled up, although we have some by the entrance. Okay, so now we're standing by a grand piano, and it doesn't look like it's in the best repair. It looks like something you'd see in a haunted house. This is a piano I would expect to start playing itself as soon as the mausoleum closes at 4 p.m. And who might be playing it? Victor Young, who's buried in a slot behind us, was a very talented composer. He was nominated for many, many Academy Awards for Best Score, and he was a violinist.
And it says 1901 to 1956, and he's got a Star of David.
He was nominated for 23 Academy Awards and won one.
Won Around the World in 80 Days. Finally, he won.
Yeah. So again, he grew up in Europe, in Poland, and then came here in the 1920s, I think, and just was in the right place at the right time for the burgeoning film industry. And he contributed music immensely.
And for those asking, if you try to play the piano, it doesn't play. I think they took
I think you have to be a ghost to play the ghost piano. Hollywood Forever is not just for famous people. There are so many families have grave sites here over the years. Sometimes the headstone just says last name. Sometimes there's more details, so you can start to get a glimpse of people's lives, how long they lived, were they married.
So after your mushroom soup and you become part of the mycelium of humanity or the universe, do you want a monument made for you?
I think no. The funeral. If you look at the way that the funeral industry in the US has developed, it's very anti-environmental, and modern burials can be an environmental disaster, particularly if you get embalmed or some nonsense like that. And the idea that you need to be buried inside a perpetual casket inside a concrete liner and will just slowly decompose, leaking toxins into the ground, is not for me.
Yeah, I like the idea of a little plaque, like maybe planting a tree.
Trees are good.
Planting a tree with a little plaque underneath, so I can give shade to the coyotes.
One of the things that we'll sort of see as we move around is there's a lot of wildlife here.
Yeah.
So there's squirrels everywhere. We've met the peacocks. There's swans and ducks, and seasonally there are migrating geese as well.
Yeah, and this is a nice view that as we're walking through. We see the Hollywood sign in the background, and it's framed by palm trees. And it's a very sunny day. There's a bunch of mushrooms.
Our mushroom friends are everywhere.
Oh, here's Mel Blanc. So describe what we're seeing here.
So Mel Blanc's tombstone has the greatest epitaph ever. It says, "That's all, folks. Mel Blanc, man of 1,000 voices, beloved husband and father." In keeping with Jewish tradition, people have been leaving pebbles on his grave. There's a few flowers, but I've been here before when people have left carrots to symbolize Bugs Bunny.
Oh, that's cute.
Which is so cute. I think there's always a kind of uptick in activity on these graves around people's anniversaries, birthdays, death days. So we're walking towards the south of the cemetery, and just over that wall is Paramount Studios.
Paramount is the second oldest film studio in the U.S. Universal Pictures is older. And Paramount being here in Hollywood is entirely owed to the fact that there was a cemetery here that had too much land.
Original tract of land that was purchased for the cemetery, and in 1899 it was just too big, and in the 1920s a movie company bought that sort of southern half of the plot, and that's Paramount Studios, which is the last kind of working studio in this area of Hollywood.
And this is one of those inflection points in history. Would Hollywood be Hollywood if Paramount hadn't chosen this spot? Would the orphan Norma Jean become Marilyn Monroe if the bedroom window of her orphanage hadn't faced the Paramount Tower and given her the dream of working in the movie business? Is it possible that basically the entire fate and existence of Hollywood is thanks to this very cemetery?
I don't know how many of you are Ray Bradbury fans, but he wrote Graveyard for Lunatics about a young screenwriter in the 1950s who gets up to all sorts of hijinks in a movie studio that abuts a cemetery.
Which is Paramount and Hollywood Forever. Oh, I do see a big Griffith. Is that Griffith Jenkins Griffith over there?
No, there is a Griffith, J. Griffith, our friend, has a giant obelisk as men of his ilk tended to do, to have a giant phallic symbol on their grave in that era. I think he bought the grave long before he died and probably arranged that obelisk as well. Where we're walking towards now is actually called the Fairbanks lawn, and that's where in the summer they have movie screenings. So if you don't mind lining up for hours, sitting on a low and uncomfortable chair and watching a movie with up to, I think, 4,000 people on a Saturday night, then this is your jam. And the movie screenings are such, they're a huge success, and they've helped raise a lot of money to help preserve and conserve the cemetery itself. So they make a profit, but it goes into doing things like repairing the beautiful stained glass we were looking at earlier. And there are lots of activities here as well. As I say, bands play. The former Masonic Lodge, which is now at the front entrance. There's some very intimate gigs happen there with big stars who want like a smaller venue with some kudos. Okay, here we are at the Fairbanks lawn. Both Fairbanks are buried, and we're about to go look at their lovely tomb.
This is a nice lawn where there is no graves here.
And the reason why there's no graves here is because, as we'll see, there's a sort of a natural undulation and dip in the land, and it's actually quite marshy. So originally the local neighbours were like, this is terrible, you can't put graves there, it's marshland, because they were farmers and they knew the land. So there are areas of the cemetery that have never had graves dug in them because the ground is just too soggy, and we're walking across one of those now. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. was the kind of action star of the 1920s. He was he was a huge star, and as was his son, was more of a kind of romantic star. They're both buried here.
And then if you turn around, there is a very long pond, and it's very pretty and peaceful and bubbling.
I mean, obviously the cenotaph in Washington DC has a reflecting pool, but this pool is here. You can see it's in this natural dip, which is always waterlogged, and there are still migrating geese who come here every year, and they've been coming here every year for hundreds of years.
And then there's a big pyramid here with a window in the top, and then we have Johnny Ramone, a little statue of a guitar player, and we're standing in front of the pyramid mausoleum, and the person in there is named Andrew C. Burkle.
Billionaire family.
They do have a very nice bouquet of flowers and roses inside there. 1992 to 2020. So a young person, son, brother, friend.
Andrew Charles Burkle was a movie producer who died aged 27, and this is the family tomb. He came from a very wealthy tech family based in Southern California, and they built this tomb. I think he died in 2020. The tomb has been here probably maybe 5 or 6 years before that, and it's really sad that such a young member of the family was the first resident. But it's a beautiful tomb, and it harks back to a very important aspect of Hollywood overall, which is the Egyptian revival influence. So we have a pyramid, and we have the sort of Masonic phoenix wings, I think those are. There's a tree of life in bronze in the door. So it's kind of like a hark back to ancient rituals, but done in a very, very 21st century way.
Yeah.
We're now facing the Garden of Legends, which is very densely packed with famous people. But I like to pick and choose, so let's have a little wander. The first grave that we're going to have a look at isn't actually a grave yet. It's Johnny Ramone's cenotaph. His remains are actually still with his widow, and they won't be buried here until she dies.
I'm guessing his remains are cremated? Okay. Because if she has his corpse in her basement, that's a little scary.
That would be very rock and roll. The water you can hear in the background is we're now facing another lake, and that's a private mausoleum that's built on the island in the center of the lake, and we can see various
There's so many turtles.
Yes, I think people, as they do all around Los Angeles, they're not indigenous, they abandon their pets here, and they like to hang out, sunning themselves on the rocks. But there's fish in there, there's a pair of swans' nests just over there. We may see the beginnings of their nest if they're doing that again this year. And again, this is a body of water where the migrating geese land and hang out on their journey north or south. They do it twice a year. So this grave always makes me cry.
Yeah. We're looking at the grave for Hattie McDaniel in 1895 to 1952. What can you tell us about what you're seeing?
So Hattie McDaniel, she really bore the brunt of a lot of Hollywood racism. The stories that you read about the way she was treated after she was nominated for an Oscar are just horrific. But there are also lovely stories too about the way her co-stars, I mean, Gable in particular, really stood up for her, and you know, but it was brutal. And you know that she was an incredible actor. She clawed her way to the top. She should have had her flowers in so many ways, and she really wanted to be buried here. And she died in 1952, which is not even 100 years ago, and she couldn't because she was black. So in 1999 they dedicated a monument to her. Again, it's a cenotaph because she's not actually here, but the quote, "Aunt Hattie, you are a credit to your craft, your race, and to your family." That's from Edgar Goff. So it's a real reminder of how much segregation harms lives, even in death. Like, really, she should be here in this Garden of Legends, taking her rightful place, but because of just, you know, horrific prejudice, she was denied her last wish when she had been denied so much through what should have been a stellar, lauded career. She was asked to use the restaurant entrance. She was denied entry to places where she should have had a seat on the top table.
Do you know how long Hollywood Forever has been segregated?
It was desegregated in 1959, so she was 7 years too early. Also in the kind of rock and roll,
we have Chris Cornell, 2017.
So we've got the grave of Chris Cornell, who again was a huge Gen X icon. You've got flowers, somebody has painted pebble with a dedication, you've got a picture, you've got a couple of photos. Again, it's a place where fans can come and actually feel perhaps closer to their idol than they ever got to them in life.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Helena Hutchins, who was the cinematographer who was killed on the set of Rust when a gun went off with a real bullet that shouldn't have.
She should still be working, she should not be dead. So she's here in the Garden of Legends. There's a beautiful photo of her. I believe she was Ukrainian, so that's the Ukrainian flag. And somebody's left a white rose. I don't know who Irene Guadagno was. I don't know who she was, Mama Irene, but I absolutely love her statue. She's got fabulous heart-shaped sunglasses on.
Mama Irene is what the grave says. Not only was she perfect, she was Italian.
So,
oh, Toto.
They really should move this to over by the Judy Garland shrine. So you have a little bronze statue of Toto from The Wizard of Oz, and that dog was originally named Terry, but was actually buried in Studio City, but the Ventura Freeway, when it was built in 1958, destroyed her resting place. So now we have a memorial to Toto, which is super cute.
Yes.
We're looking at the Mickey Rooney site. I mean, he lived an incredible life. He did pretty much everything, and he was good friends with Judy Garland. So,
And people have left cactuses here, which is different. And Anne Hesh who died tragically in 2022. They have a nice picture of her here.
her death was just so tragic. She crashed her car into a house, and nobody's quite sure why, and she burnt to death, but she didn't actually die on the site of the crash. She was still alive, but horribly burned when they pulled her out. So I hope she has found peace here. We're about to enter the Cathedral Mausoleum, which I think I'd have to check it out, but I think it's 1919, 1920, and it was, as I said at the time, the largest mausoleum in the world, and it's built like a cathedral, and you'll recognise it from lots of movies and TV shows. Ryan Murphy is very fond of filming here, so quite often if he needs a church for a funeral scene, this is where.
And it's marble, all marble, and there's marble statues of saints, it looks like.
The 12 apostles.
12 apostles, okay. I don't know Christian mythology at all. Stained glass windows, there's some pews. We're going down into the hallways, and they're a little bit darker than the other mausoleum. What I like about Hollywood Forever is that you can walk around the mausoleums, unlike Forest Lawn, which isn't as nice. But beautiful stained glass windows, very tall ceilings, lots of marble, and overall, not as much sunlight. A lot of the graves here are 1920s, 1930s. I'm not seeing anything past 1930. 1909 is an early one here.
So this is Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was a very talented actor who came over from Germany or Austria. So he came over from Europe and created some of the most sinister early renditions of a psychopath on screen.
People have left some photos here of him and some stones, a stone with a painting of like a rooster on it, and some stones, like it looks like a yellow aventurine and maybe a quartz. We see this shelf that people have devoted to his stuff, but we haven't actually seen. Oh, here he is. Wait, yeah, there. Someone has left some red lipstick. It's kind of like on the bottom row there. Yep, so we have Rudolfo Valentino.
Yes.
And lots of people have left flowers and pictures and notes for him.
And you can see, compared to the other markers, his grave marker is bronze, is beautifully polished and kept clean. Even though he died almost 100 years ago, there's still an army of fans. You can see the pictures. The flowers here are fresher than any of the other places we visited.
Yeah, and there's a shelf next to the stained glass window that has so many pictures and so many flowers and poinsettias and vases, and so he has his fans still.
Yeah, I mean, I think 100,000 people showed up for his funeral procession in New York. It's hard to imagine the scale of the grief at his early death. And there's a lovely legend about the Lady in Black. So soon after he died and was interred here, a woman all dressed in black with a black veil was seen leaving a single rose on his gravesite. And she kept coming and people kept seeing her. And so all these stories grew up around who she was. And it seems like the word got out and a lot of copycats started doing it as well. So the Lady in Black was not necessarily one person, but the kind of current queen of the cemetery tour, Carrie Bible, is now the Lady in Black. And so every year, I think it's August 23rd, she comes and does the ceremony. We should come and lays the flower and dresses in black, in beautiful vintage black with a veil to do so. But it is, we've lost so much about the silent film era. We actually physically have lost those films because nobody took care of them and they were on very fragile nitrate and they just exploded.
Yeah.
So the stars that we do have memories of, that we have, photos, still images, we might not have all their movies, but the memory stays alive in the cultural consciousness. I think I wouldn't like to do it, but maybe if you asked a young person who Rudolph Valentino was, they might have an inkling. And it's to do with that sort of, again, the sort of mycelium legend, the things that we think are underground but are actually living.
But he was only 31. And he has just such a lasting impact.
He was the first big movie star to die. You know, there were lots of sort of other kind of Hollywood deaths before then, but he was the first one to kind of go earlier. And I think we're kind of used now to Hollywood being associated with tragic death. But at the time in 1926, it was more associated with eternal youth, or the very young and the very beautiful, because the first wave of movie stars hadn't had chance to grow old and bitter yet.
And, you know, I know who he was. How did he die?
Peritonitis. I knew it was painful. Yeah. He collapsed at an Ambassador Hotel, and I think it took like a couple of days. It was brutal. So yes, he collapsed on August 15th, 1926, and was diagnosed with appendicitis and gastric ulcers. And they did surgery, but it was too late, and the infection had spread to his peritoneum, the lining of his abdomen. The infection spread, he ended up with pleuritis, his lung collapsed, and it took till the early morning of August the 23rd to die. So that's 8 days.
Oh, wow.
He was a very kind man, and he embodied people's hopes and dreams for the 1920s. So when he died, I think it was the beginning of the end.
And, you know, I see so many of these graves with these dates like early 1900s, 19-teens, and I just think of the clothes that are inside those tombs, the old suits that the men would wear, the collars, ties, the tailoring.
Okay, so we're going to head back on out into the main garden of legends. There's another fairly recent grave that always moves me, and again it's a great statue.
So this is the grave of Anton Yelchin, who's so young. Tell us about this grave and about him.
Well, Anton Yelchin was an incredibly talented young actor who died in the most avoidable accident of all time. He was crushed by his own car in his own driveway, and it was a fault that had actually had that model recalled, but he hadn't gotten around to taking his car into the dealership. You can see how people still very highly regard him. With the Star Trek movies, he was in one of my favorite movies, Green Room. Like he really had a whole wonderful career ahead of him, and so many people have left offerings on the gravesite. There's some Star Trek memorabilia. There's what looks like fridge magnets from all over the world. People have made like tiles which say Anton and placed them on the stones. I mean, this most beautiful display of fresh white roses as well. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 beautiful pots. He was so young. He was born in 1989. I think it's 2014, 2015 he dies. Yeah. And it just says Anton Yelchin, March 11th, 1989 to forever, because I think he will live forever through his performances.
But look at all of these turtles. They are having such a good time hanging out on their rocks. And so Paul Rubens' grave, and we see a little bow tie on it. What are you saying?
So Paul Rubens very sadly died in 2023. Again, another great character. He was always shining light for a lot of people, though, and you can see that there's tributes here. And the tribute that really gets me is people bring little red bow ties.
Yeah, it's so cute.
That memorialize his greatest role as Pee Wee Herman. But Paul Rubens was a lot more than just Pee Wee Herman. He was a figure of the kind of like Hollywood in the 80s. By all accounts, he was a great friend and a very funny guy, and he's buried here on the banks of the lake.
Oh, wow. So tell us about her grave.
So Hannah Chaplin was very mentally ill, I think, in the last few years of her life.
And didn't she have uterine cancer or cervical cancer? Just something painful.
Yeah, and so those of you who know about Charlie Chaplin know that he grew up in great poverty in London, and then he came over and made his fortune in Hollywood, and he brought his mother over and she was cared for in various nursing homes here. And if you've seen I think it's 1992, the Chaplin movie, Geraldine Chaplin, who would have been this lady's great-granddaughter, played her.
Oh, wow. Yay, we found her. So this is Virginia Rapp, 1895 to 1921. Tell us about her. And there's tons of fake flowers around and little statues and a little dog.
Virginia Rapp is one of those unfortunates who's more famous for her Hollywood death than she is for her Hollywood career. So she was a very beautiful young actress model, and she got into the party set in the late teens, 1920s, and ended up at a party on Labor Day, September 5th, 1921, in a hotel in San Francisco. Also at that party was Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, who was a huge star. Those were the days of kind of 20-minute reels, silent films, and he was this sort of big fat guy who did a lot of pratfalls and stunts, and he was a huge star. He was a marquee name, and he was at this party, and there are various accounts of what happened about whether he actually raped her with a bottle, supposedly, or whether it wasn't him but he was just blamed for it. There's all kinds of, it's one of those we'll never know. But poor Virginia died a few days later of a ruptured bladder and, like Rudolph Valentino, peritonitis.
Oh my gosh.
And she is buried here alongside the guy who was at that point her fiance.
Oh wow. Her fiance died, it looks like 25 years later, in 1946. Henry Lerman.
So there were 3 trials, and Fatty Arbuckle was eventually acquitted, but his career was in ruins. And there was a lot of the ladies and the people who would eventually get the production code passed, the Catholic Church, were very...
Oh, the Hays Code?
The Hays Code people were very anti-Fatty Arbuckle, and they got his movies banned. And, you know, he went off to Europe to try and sort of rehabilitate himself, because he was never actually found guilty of manslaughter. But again, it was all kind of over. And the scandal was very salaciously reported in the newspapers of the time. And it's one of those things where it's one of those tragedies that was used to bring censorship in of movies. These people do these terrible things at parties. They should not be allowed to have any control over the nation's psyche. I mean, that's something I'm so fascinated by, was the kind of realization belatedly that people cared more about movie stars than they did about what their priests were saying in the pulpit. You get this rise of movie theaters as the new church. The new church. They're extravagantly they're built like palaces. People go and sit quietly in the dark and absorb all these messages. The Catholic Church was not happy because they'd been doing that for centuries, and they were very aware of how you could influence people. This is part of the big war that happens it begins 10 years earlier. Almost as soon as movies start getting out there are calls for censorship and control. But the poor Virginia became a pawn in that fight. But she's buried here in Hollywood forever. Clearly people still remember her and what happened to her and how tragic it was, because whether Fatty Arbuckle did it or not, a young woman died of horrible internal injuries, and that's a tragedy.
This is cute. This guy has a grave that has dachshunds all over it, like not just engravings but like statues of like dachshunds.
Okay, so this is the Doxy grave. Thankfully Mike Szymanski is still with us, and he has invested not in conventional property in LA but this kind of property. So it's a marble sofa, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Doxies, and each of these statues is based on a real dachshund that Mike once owned. Aww. And I think since this grave was installed, there's been an extra dog. Aww. Because dogs live such a short life. It was very popular on Instagram.
Why did he do this?
Because he loves dachshunds so much.
And so this is where he wants to be buried.
And so he's going to be buried here when his time comes, buried with effigies of all his dogs. As those of us who love our animals know, it is not strictly legal to have a human and an animal buried in the same grave. But if you're going to be buried, keep those ashes because nobody's going to know.
Yeah, you can put them in your coffin.
I have some collections of ashes that are all going to go in wherever into my mushroom suit with me.
Yeah. Okay, this is Jenkins Griffith, phallic obelisk.
Jenkins Griffith, who, as we discussed last time, and you should go back and listen to that podcast if you haven't already listened to that episode, had a very traumatic life, and this is his obelisk. And he bought this obelisk long before he died because I think it's probably one of the tallest monuments in the cemetery because that's how he rolled, as we know. And it simply says Griffith on it, and then there's a sort of marker in front, 1850 to 1919.
Okay.
But yes, we have a sumptuous obelisk. So let's go look at something to do with the living.
Oh my gosh, there's the most beautiful brown sitting on someone's grave. Oh my gosh, there's so many cats here.
There is a whole colony of feral cats here. There's another one sitting under the trees. They get them fixed and vaccinated, and they feed them, take care of them. They're working cats because they take care of rodents.
And there's a black one over there.
Yeah. Different cultures have different beliefs about cats, because cats, I do think, walk between worlds.
They know when people are going to die.
Yeah, and the fact that you have all these beautiful, chill cats who are guardians, essentially, of the cemetery, I think is lovely.
I have to see this beautiful brown agouti cat who is on this grave, which is my dream, to have an animal visit my grave. And the cat is continuing to make biscuits on the headstone of the grave. Whose grave are you on? Why are you the ghost of this person? You've moved slightly so that I can see 18.
Adelaide Asperger, who died in 1934. Maybe been through a couple of soul cycles and has earned her karma to come back as a cemetery cat, which I feel like is possibly one of the highest positions on the wheel of life.
Any final words, kitty kitty? Or maybe this cat is the reincarnation of Adelaide's lover and has come back to protect this grave.
This is a memorial tomb, and it was raised in the memory of the people who died in the LA Times bombing of 1910. And the plaque reads, "Our martyred men," and this imposing pile reared by the Los Angeles Times stands here to perpetuate the names, virtues and the memories of those honoured dead who in life toiled in the ranks of the journal which they served so long and so well, and who fell at their posts in the Times building on the awful morning of October 1st, 1910, victims of conspiracy, dynamite and fire, the crime of the century.
The crime of the century has been forgotten because I did not know about the LA Times bombing.
It was horrific. They just burned up. It was an incendiary bomb. And then obviously this is Harry Chandler, founder of the LA Times, kind of family grave. Harry Chandler, who was he the father or uncle of Raymond Chandler?
Okay.
So the Chandler family were very wealthy. They owned the newspaper. They were big in oil. And this is the Chandler family grave. Again, very imposing. Bird imagery, eagles, phoenixes, a finagle.
And is it another huge obelisk?
Harrison Gray Otis's father, he comes from a long time. So he was the publisher of the Los Angeles Times. So this is clearly Los Angeles Times country. And his father was a senator. I think he was mayor of Los Angeles. I've just pulled up a picture, and he had very stern-looking face with stern facial hair. So he fought in the Civil War and then came to Los Angeles in 1882. He was one of the visionaries that predicted how big Los Angeles would grow, because when he moved here, of course, it was just 12,000 people. Yeah. He had the vision to go, no, we need to be planning and expanding for the great metropolis that this city will become. So yeah, he understood that you needed to have good roads and railways, and we talk about a new robber baron age, and not to excuse the stuff that the robber barons did, because it was pretty heinous, but a lot of them did have big, generous visions for what they thought the USA could be. And I feel like in this second age of robber barons, they don't have that. These people who are kind of fulfilling the robber baron role now, they don't want libraries or hospital wings or universities named after them. They're not thinking about their legacy. They're not thinking about making the world a better place for people who are less well off than them. And that's the big difference. And you can see it in the scope of these monuments. These are men who died and they wanted to be remembered for their deeds.
Well, the billionaires now, they just want to amass as much wealth as possible. It doesn't matter what communities they crush or who they crush in the process. And then they will be basically remembered as being the ultra evil people who destroyed society.
Never forget that avarice is perhaps the deadliest of the deadly sins. And that's worth thinking about. So many of these graves tell a story. I mean, if there's one object that has the most symbolism, it's a tombstone. It's a way of connecting with lots and lots of human lives in the space of walking around for hours in the space of 2 hours.
The song used in this week's show is Our Blood by Rona Rapatis. Check out her website in the show notes. And that's it for this week's Haunted Hollywood Hour. If you enjoyed the show, please help others find the show by leaving a rating or a review. Give us a follow on Instagram at Haunted Hollywood Hour Podcast, all one word. If you'd like to contact us, send us an email at hauntedhollywoodhour@gmail.com. Until next time, bye!